Welcome to Red Pill Nation. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm speaking with Taya Smith. Taya is a digital strategy consultant, political scientist, and blogger hailing from Western Australia. She is, like me, left-leaning in much of her politics, but has spoken out against cancel culture and other totalitarian tendencies of what she's taken to calling the woke cult. She streams often on her self-titled YouTube channel and posts often on her Twitter account @Telo. That's at Tealou. You can find links to all of her social media in the description down below. Taya, thank you for joining us on Red Pill Nation.
Thank you. It's always weird to hear yourself introduced.
Yeah, I imagine
it's never not weird.
Yeah, I haven't gone on someone else's show yet, but I've thought about that. Like, oh, what will they say about me? I don't know. And I'm always worried I'll get something wrong. That's why I made sure I have your name pronunciation right before the show. So I'm glad that
I didn't tell you my pronouns, so.
Oh no, yeah, I might have gotten those wrong. I'll have to.
Mine are he, him. Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
But anyway, so I want to.
Okay.
I want to start
Sorry.
with just. No, that's okay. It is. I mean, honestly, at some point, I mean, I've been asked that stuff at work. I'm going to go on some show at some point, especially if I grow my audience to the level I want it to be at, and they're going to ask me my damn pronouns, and I don't know what I'm going to say. Actually, that's the thing that before we even get into your background, just that's a constant struggle for me with at work. This could be a whole thing. I'll try to redirect it so that we can get to a little bit about you. But where I work, they want me to put it in the email signature, and that's a big thing where I'm like, I haven't put it yet. No one's asked me, and But anyway, Taya, thanks for coming on. I want to just ask you a little bit about yourself so that my audience can learn a little bit more about what you're doing. And I appreciate you, by the way, joining me all the way from Australia. It's my lighting is a little off today for my audience. They'll notice because it's actually nighttime here in the United States, at least where I am. But it's daytime over there. Anyway,
yes.
If you could tell me a little bit about just sort of how you found yourself in your position as an online political commentator, political scientist. You're also a senior digital strategy consultant.
Yeah.
How did you sort of find yourself in that position and speaking out against what you call the woke cult, despite the fact that, you are on the left yourself, at least nominally so. You're obviously not a radical leftist.
I'm a Marxist.
Well, I mean, so tell me about that. So how did you sort of find yourself?
Okay. Well, it's kind of a long journey. I studied politics at university. So I fell in love with what I thought politics was, which I think we were talking about before, which is, and I was heavily involved in student politics, studied political science. Then went and got my master's degree, all of that sort of stuff. Big fan of policy, all that sort of stuff. But eventually, and got involved in student politics and party politics, but got burnt out very early on. So, very TLDR on this. It's a very long thing. But I was involved in politics from a very young age, from my 20s. This was in sort of early 2000s. So a lot of this stuff hadn't really hit yet. So I was studied in sort of that classical political science, economics, legal studies, all of that sort of material reality stuff. I'd had some exposure to the critical theory stuff, but it was very much contained. I call it the controlled burn. It was over in the sociology department, and you'd sort of take a sociology unit or two, right? But it was just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting idea. I'd like to think about it differently. And, it was just that kind of thing. It wasn't it wasn't the bedrock of everything else like it sort of seems to have become now. I think for those that are younger, like even you, because I'm 41 and Gen X, right? And I think for those that are younger, they don't realize how quickly and rapidly this has shifted everything. It's like the earth has just swung sort of 3 degrees off its axis very quickly. So I'm very lucky that I had that time where I just learned like economics, philosophy, the classics, Marxism. And when I say I'm a Marxist, I would argue that as a scholar, I would argue that Marx was right about a lot of things, right? But I'm just, so I'm just saying like a traditional left, right? So my digital career started because I was on maternity leave with my second child, and I was just sort of grabbing piecemeal work for a few like musicians that I liked and was part of their community, and they sort of started referring me work, and I was sort of faced with a choice at the end of my maternity leave whether I wanted to go back into policy work or keep doing this web thing. And this web thing seemed cool. Again, for the young people at the back, there was a point where it wasn't really a viable career. It was a hobby. It was something you just did for fun. And so I said, no, okay, let's do this thing. And I started I started freelancing in web design, built an agency, and did all of that sort of stuff. So then I've always just been politically active. So commentating on the political political and ethical implications of digital. You know, I've always been that sort of shouty, annoying person in the room, like 10 years ago in conferences where all the engineers were sitting there going, big data, we can do all these things, we can target people, we can do all this stuff with data. And I'm like, guys, hello, no, hang on. This might not end well. This might not end well. And, you know, so I've always been that person throughout my career, that sort of annoying sort of boil on everybody's bum in my industry. And recently I think the turning point for me was seeing the Waze app. Yeah, so basically what happens is you drive past a billboard, like, for example, McDonald's, or for example, let's say alcohol, right? This is where I start to go, this isn't like major ethical issue. So you drive past a billboard, if you've got the Waze navigation GPS app running, that pops up with an ad and offers to redirect you to McDonald's or to, you know, that place to get whatever. And when you think about, you know, our addiction to junk food, you know, all those sorts of things, right? How people aren't necessarily, I just had a big ethical problem with this because I networked with a lot of sort of marketing people and they were all going, genius, genius, hurrah, hurrah. And again, I have to be that person that's the negative one that says, hey, they're not selling bananas on this thing. You know, it's like, at what point and that's an area of interest where as a user experience designer, I've always said we have a responsibility to people, right? To not just shovel that stuff in. Yeah, anyway, I started to have a problem with that. So that was a few years. And then I became aware, I've always been a lifelong feminist, lifelong lefty, could back it, could argue it. I know I wandered off, but it is related because it does sit with the fact that, because I also then got very dangerously ill and I just had time to think. And like I had there's a series of identity quakes along the way, right? And and then I became aware of this whole trans debate and saw what was happening with Megan Murphy and a number of other people and the unfairness. And it's one of those things where I say that it's like a thread being pulled, right, on a lot of stuff where I never really bought into this full woke sort of feminism. I've always been a radical feminist, reasonable. I've always been fairly reasonable feminist, right? I'm married to a wonderful man, all those sorts of things. I'm happy. I'm a happy feminist who still cares about women's issues, right? Not one of these sort of the intersectional. I understand, again, maybe it's just because I had the theoretical base that I saw it go crazy. So I was hanging out on online forums. Jezebel used to be actually a pretty decent website for women and women's issues. And there was just a point around 2013, 2014, where they just started to change the language and use the words. And I wrote it off and I just went, you know, this is just dumb people who don't understand it. They're just being dumb. Right? I really thought it's like, oh, okay, they just don't understand the theory because most people don't understand Marxist theory. Most people don't understand that they don't read the source material, right? It's like, well, okay, you just don't get it. That's cool. That's just the comment section. Yeah. That's just the comment section. You know, I think over time it's like, oh, that's just the comment section. Oh, that's just Reddit. That's just, you know, and, you know, I know I like making fun of Americans, but it's like, oh, that's just Americans being dumb Americans. It's just the AOL.com people, you know. We've dealt with them forever. The invasion of the AOL.com people on Usenet was, you know, something for the ages, right? I'm just kidding. But actually, I was talking about me anyway. We should probably tell your audience that I am also an aspiring comic and comedy fan, so I'm usually joking. So, not to be serious, I'm not.
Joke away. This is not a politically correct podcast. You got,
exactly.
I don't mind you making fun of Americans. I love it.
No, exactly. Yeah, but you know, whoops, sorry. One sec. Sorry, I kicked this thing. The So I think we should have prefaced with that, which is that there's a lot of very intense people on my Twitter account who take me very seriously because I do talk about serious issues, but I am ultimately just the jester. I'm the jester, not the king, all right?
Yeah. Well, and this actually, it's funny. This
queen.
actually leads into something I wanted to ask you about, Taya, which is, you're talking about how kind of there's this thing where, because, you said like, oh, maybe I should preface if I make one of these jokes about Americans that I'm an aspiring comic. I like comedy. I'm joking around.
Yeah.
But, it used to be not that long ago, like you've said, it's cropped up pretty recently. Used to be not that long ago that people just would joke about things, and you would assume if somebody said something that was a little bit quirky or out there, out of left field, that it was just a joke and people would relax. But now there's sort of this almost anti-comedy bent to the politicization of everything. And I know you're a comedy fan and an aspiring comic. Tell me a little bit about sort of what you think the effects of sort of the woke cult are on the creative process, especially as it pertains to comedy.
Well, as I've said before, Billy Connolly has a wonderful bit about this, about Christian rock. And he's like, I suggest people watch it. And it's like, it's Christian rock. Like it's always just something missing where they're shredding the guitar and, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, Jesus loves you. It's like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It's not for you, It's like, that's his bit. But it's actually sort of the main reason why I joined Twitter back in, I'm on my second account, but I joined in very early on. I was first 500,000, like easy, like very early adopted, like 2007, right? And I saw the potential in this because I was working with, musicians and people like that at the time. What I saw was, and I was always nagging them, log on to the forum, talk to your fans, log on to the forum, talk to your fans, and they wouldn't do it. And they'd push me and I'd go, no, they don't care. And so I saw Twitter as bridging that gap. Right. And it does come back to comedy. But I saw Twitter as bridging that gap for fans and artists, that direct access between fans and artists, right? And building that fan community, because that's something that I'm passionate about. And it's like it removed the friction for the people that I was working with. So if you're in an airport, at the time you could just SMS Twitter. This is you send an SMS and it would go to Twitter and it would broadcast it, right? And I was like, you're at an airport, you take a photo of this or photo of that or a little quip, and all of your fans get to engage with you. That was what I saw. So I got a number of blue checks on there very early on, like celebrities. Before sort of Kim Kardashian and all the mainstream, it was more like indie musicians, comedians, those sorts of people. I think this was even before Stephen Fry. This was how early this was. And but the reason I used Twitter was because I like writing jokes. And one thing that I loved was the constraints of Twitter. So 140 characters or 140 characters or less. How can I write something ridiculous or funny or, whatever, an observation, right? Some of my greatest, like I just used to go, when it was chronological, it used to be fun on a Friday night to just do a tweet storm of just riffing, right? Riffing and being funny and that's how it was. That's how it was. The culture that literally built the culture of Twitter was jokes. Like, I don't think, again, kids today don't understand how much the rules changed on us 5-6 years ago. They just went, okay, they built this entire platform based on a culture of jokes and constraint and saying ridiculous, outrageous shit, all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden they went, well, all of these things that you were able to do, right, we're going to expand the character count, add threads, make it so that you're not allowed to joke. And if you do joke, we're going to make it so that all of your old tweets are searchable forever and a day so that we can be destroyed at any given moment. Like, I don't think people, again, I think it's just, there's that tipping point. I think it's a tipping point of about 5 or 6 years where I'm on the other side of 40 versus the sort of the early 30s Twitter people. They don't understand what really, how we were fucked over by that platform in terms of the rules just completely being thrown out and just rewritten, right? Anyway. So in terms of comedy, it's basically gone from all jokes and being built on jokes to you are no longer allowed to joke at all. It's crazy. Like
They call
it's
it
really
clapter. It's like
weird.
you just get people to clap and go like, oh yeah, they said something about
Yeah,
Trump, which, like, you know, I have my feelings about Trump, but if you're just going up on stage to say that, you know, the orange man is bad and like
yeah.
expect people
It's
to just be
lazy.
howling with laughter, it is lazy. It's so
Yeah,
lazy. And there's always been lazy
yeah,
comics, but they got this gift from God with this woke thing where they can just get people to clap and not even make
yeah.
jokes like you're saying.
Well, I think I said this, which is that it's lazy comedy. And, you know, if you can there's a difference between an agreement laugh and getting a whole room to laugh with something uncomfortable. They're different things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I don't, it's very weird. Like I've been working on writing sort of jokes that are like down the line lately. Twitter is identical to what has happened to the left, which is
Mm.
that I am just doing what I've always done. Nothing has changed. I'm still a good person. I'm the same person. I'm
Mm-hmm.
the exact same thing. Nothing has changed. They left us. They
Yeah.
changed the rules, right? That's what's actually happened here. And I think that a lot of the reason why I ended up coming back to your first question, which is, you know, I'm ADD as shit, so I apologize.
You're fine.
But
Thank you.
coming back to your first question about political commentating was that I saw this as being like people weren't reading my written words correctly. They were
Mm.
misreading me. Like I've always written like with humor and stuff. And I went, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe they need to see my body language. Maybe they need to see me make eye contact. Maybe they need to see all these other things. I was deathly afraid of video. And so I just felt the need to just start talking about this stuff. Yeah, so I just didn't expect it to be anything other than me just overcoming a fear of the camera.
With Twitter, you know, you kind of had this thing where everything's very taboo, everything's very funny, very raunchy, politically incorrect. Comedy was always supposed to be about that. If you look back at Carlin, you
Yeah.
look back certainly at like Lenny Bruce, you look back at even, you know, Eddie Murphy or anyone from the 80s, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it was always about pushing the envelope and saying things that, while funny, also kind of make people think and maybe, gasp, God forbid, make people uncomfortable or might even
Mm.
offend some more uptight people. And that's kind of the point. And then we've just really, really lost that. I feel like there was a certain amount of just, I mean, I don't know, but political correctness has sort of taken several forms over the course of the past few decades. At one
Mm.
point, there was kind of the religious right version of it, of don't talk about sex, don't talk about violence, you know, can't sell GTA, you know, in the video game stores or whatever. But then now it really seems like that's kind of gone away and we're getting sort of the woke cult version of that. And like you said,
Yeah.
it's really just been the past like 10 years at most, not even, maybe just 5 or 6 years, where it's
Mm.
really, really gotten out of hand.
Yeah. Well, I think that what's happened, and I see this from the marketing side as well, because what we do on the marketing side of things, and I think that it's just the nature of the internet, because I think when you start looking at what I said about Twitter being about connecting fans with their audience, or ultimately you're creating mini cults. Right. So if you're looking at something like, say, the true fans principle, right? I don't know if people are aware of that, but this idea that if you can get 1,000 true fans that will buy everything that you create and they're true believers, right? This is a true fans principle for musicians and entertainers. And it works for YouTubers as well. If you can get 1,000 people, it's what Patreon's built on, the true fans principle. Enough people put money down, you can have a decent living as an artist,
Yeah.
right? And you're free, right? And I think we basically accidentally built cults.
Yeah.
And it's the unintended consequences of a good thing, right? I think that it's just kind of, and, you know, critical theory and Tumblr and the 4chan, long range war between Tumblr and 4chan, they've inadvertently built these strange cults. We've got new toys we don't know how to manage. This, you know, clash of tribes, right? And we're just working through it. That's the thing. I do believe that the woke cult is the most immediate threat, but there's a number of them. There's a number of different cults, right? Once you start to see cults for what they are, you start to see the vegan cult, the paleo cult, the keto cult, everyone's, even the feminists have their cults, you know, and it's just, I think it's just one of those things where it's the sort of flip side of what I was talking about before, with this data-driven marketing. We weren't really thinking about the unintended consequences of what we were building. So when you're building a fan community, you want that cult psychology, you want that true fan stuff. Even the organizer's handbook, right, which I've talked about, which is the playbook that a lot of the digital activists use, right? It's a radicalization handbook in the wrong hands, right? And that's the thing, is like, is this just a thing where we've got new tools, we don't know how to use them yet, and it will sell, and it's sort of correcting.
Yeah. Well, in some cases, it seems like we know how to use them a little bit too well, for, like you said, for the sort of cultivation.
Well, yeah. Well, the bad actors are slightly always ahead of the good guys, right? Like we were talking about student politics, where we went in. I naively thought that politics was about winning hearts and minds with good ideas and having a good heart, and then you realise that it's actually just all a cynical numbers game of manipulation and you know, all of that sort of stuff. And it changes you, makes you cynical. And it's like, well, you either give in to that cynicism, right? And you see it happening to AOC and people like that. You see that she goes in and she's like, I've got these ideas, but gradually it just wears you down and it wears you down and it wears you down. And then, yeah, you get what I'm saying? There's that insidious...
that aspect
the system
of it
gets
where,
you.
Yeah, you go into, I'm glad you brought that up. I was actually just talking to a friend about this the other day, how if you go into the world of politics very sort of idealistic, thinking like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to change people's minds and we're going to get stuff done and we're going to solve problems for my country and for this world. And then you'll see people go in and then they get a little bit of a taste of clout. Like they start working their way up the rungs of, you know, here in the States, it's the Republican or the Democratic Party. And I think a really good example of this, somebody who I kind of felt like sort of went Hollywood or went DC in our case, like sort of got a taste of the clout and then stopped really being as open, was unfortunately somebody who I still really respect, who I'd love to talk to at some point, which is Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, I don't know if you remember his presidential campaign. I know you're in Australia, so it wasn't as big of a deal there, of course. But
I follow it quite closely.
Yeah, because you're on Twitter, so you saw. Yeah, I mean, his people are all over the place. So you know, Yang is somebody who's pretty open-minded. He went on Ben Shapiro's show. He went on the Rubin Report. He's been on Rogan. I mean, Rogan really launched his campaign. He was very friendly with like the intellectual dark web, which I'm really a big fan of. He's the kind of person I'd still love to chat with at some point, and I still think he's a great guy. But when he started to get some clout in the Democratic Party, he kind of went Hollywood, and he started to use some of that woke language. He did a whole bit during a debate about how men are stupid. We should all just listen to women. And I was just like, oh God, like, and it wasn't, you know, and he was dead serious too. It was just like, and it was just the kind of thing where I was just like, you know, he's smarter than that. And it sucks to see people kind of, I felt the same way also about Pete Buttigieg. He was a fairly moderate, open-minded mayor from the Midwest, also got a little bit of a taste of that clout. And instead of going like, well, hold on a minute, I got to be steadfast and keep my principles, he just sort of went along with it. And I feel like that's part of the cult process too, is making sure people feel that there's a reward structure for getting more and more cultivated into the cult.
Oh, for sure. That's that positive and negative reinforcement that you get when you're going up the ladder of engagement, so to speak, or up the ladder, right? I often refer to Going Clear. You know, the documentary. Yes. There's a scene in that documentary where they talk about how they don't tell you about the crazy shit up front. That's, you know, what they do is if you did that, you would walk away, right? Same thing with like a domestic violence sort of situation or whatever. If they punched you on the first date, you wouldn't be in it. It's one of those things where it's a gradual creep, and it's a constant, that series of positive and negative, that grooming, right, that occurs across the board. And that's why I think it's really good to focus not so much on the beliefs. I think people focus too much on the belief. It's more about how the behavior and the conduct, where it's identical. And once you start to see like that, the organizer's handbook, right? I don't know, a lot of people on the left are familiar with it, especially in politics. That's the same playbook that all BLM, Antifa, all those people, they all use the exact same tactics, right? Exact same tactics. So they just some apply them very badly and some apply them very well, right? But once you see the tactics and you see what they do, you start to see how they're all the same. They're just using it for a different purpose. Like the trans movement uses it incredibly well, right? And it's, you know, very sophisticated movement versus, say, Chaz Chop, right? Where they've tried to do it and they're not so great.
Not quite as successful.
It's what plants crave, you know, like you get to see the idiocracy version of it, right? And so there's comedy in all of this, but so I prefer to separate the belief from the behavior, because then you start to see it everywhere. Like literally, ISIS used the same tactics for radicalization online as the Democrats.
Yeah,
it's the same playbook.
Yeah.
It's the ladder of engagement. Anyway, but that's why, as a marketer, you see it from a different angle, where it's like, well, we were just doing lead gen and prospects and building communities and having leaders and engaging people and love bombing people and making people feel welcome and, you know, all of these things. And we were actually just radicalizing people without realizing it. Some did realize it, but we didn't. So that's the thing. It's like a weird thing. And I think I don't envy Jack. I don't envy the position that Jack and Zuckerberg and those people are in, because I truly do believe that they mean well, and I couldn't do any better than they're doing. I don't believe they own their organizations anymore. They're figureheads.
Yeah.
There's something that's just bigger than them, right?
Yeah. I agree. And I think this point that you made about focusing on the tactics as opposed to the beliefs is very important. This is something that I have heard before, and that I think is crucial to people's understanding of the woke cult, which is the beliefs are so inherently contradictory. I mean, you mentioned how for you were part of this phenomenon where feminism kind of clashes with trans ideology, like we did with Meghan Murphy. And then eventually it's just sort of like, this is completely contradictory. This cannot stand. So the beliefs don't make any sense. They completely contradict.
No,
and the place where there is consistency it's what really defines them is in the tactics. Like you said, there's a uniformity always. There's a great speech I recommend to all my listeners, and to you, Taya, if you haven't seen it, by Brett Weinstein of Evergreen fame or infamy, I guess. And where it's called How the Magic
Idea
Trick
Laundering.
Is Done.
Yeah.
And he talks all about this, how it's these consistent tactics, whereas the beliefs are completely inconsistent and contradictory. So they're almost irrelevant. You got to look at
But they're
tactics.
actually also borrowed. They're also piecemeal. And I think that, and this has been something where, and, you know, I love James Lindsay and all the work he's doing, but that's one area of disagreement that I have with James, is that I think that they give this too much coherence as an ideology. When you see that, like, Scientology is not an ideology. It borrows from various things to build a cult. The cult is at the center, and the beliefs are built around the cult, not the cult built around the beliefs. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it's more of a different idea, where the cult will just do whatever what gives them power, or keeps people engaged or whatever. It doesn't have to be coherent. That's the point. Yeah. Critical theory provides a nice, convenient way to do that. But I also can, having come out of the humanities, I also don't want, my biggest frustration is that I feel like I'm also defending a lot of very valid philosophical principles, like Marxism. Marx was a materialist, right? I'm saying I'm defending some of these ideas. Feminism, intersectionality, I'm defending some of these ideas because I feel like they've stolen it from, it's been and repackaged as well, James Lindsay talks about the skin suit. They're wearing all of these things like a skin suit. And I worry that I feel like I'm fighting for the intellectual credibility of the left a lot of the time. Because they're still credible.
And the worst one, the most egregious one, where they sort of co-opt it and they bastardize it and it's unrecognizable, is anti-racism. I mean, which really just means racism, and it used to be MLK marching in the streets for what was obviously a noble cause, and they've sort of they use the veneer of credibility that comes with anti-racism, feminism, all these nice things that we all want to agree with, right? I mean, even to a certain extent. I mean, most people might not say they want to agree with Marxism. That's more of a minority opinion, but people they believe in everyone in the middle class kind of has a little bit of a resentment of the bourgeoisie, on a subconscious level at least.
Well, so when I say I'm a Marxist in the sheets, but a social democrat in the streets. Sorry. So like I think that's the problem, is that you can be a Marxist when you're a scholar in terms of analysis. So I believe that Marxism is an extremely useful framework for critique of the failures of capitalism. Even Marx intended it to be a diagnosis of history, not a model to be applied. I think the model to be applied is things more like Keynesian economics or mixed economy, or, you know, those sorts of things that soften the edges of capitalism to you know, like, I think that's
Right.
that sort of providing that rudder, you know, keeping things on track, right? When I say I'm a Marxist, I mean that in terms of theory and scholarship as Marx intended.
Right. Well, and that's
Not
the
as
thing is,
even Marx fell out with the socialists
yeah,
by the end.
he would be
He was like,
rolling in
this
his
is not what I
grave.
meant.
You know, like Marx,
Yeah.
or certainly, I mean, you know, you go to like MLK, or even,
Mm.
you know, just a lot of people. Well, and this is another thing I want to talk about. It's not just these big figures that, if they fully understood what was going on, I mean, so the people we were just talking about are dead, but there's also people that are sort of just uninitiated into what's actually happening. One of the things you've talked about on Twitter, I saw, is
Judith
like,
Butler concerns me.
oh yeah. One of the things I've seen you talk about is this idea of converting normies, which is sort of the terminology for just people who maybe are somewhat apathetic towards politics, or they don't pay a ton of attention, or they just have very moderate politics and they don't really follow it super duper closely. And I know that you're sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, you're on somewhat of a mission to kind of bring them in as the cavalry, which is kind of how I feel about it, is we need to bring in the normal, sane people who just don't know what's happening, because the mainstream media puts a smokescreen up. Of course, you know, they asked a congressman here in the United States to talk to us about Antifa. He goes, isn't that a myth? You know, like, it's just this gaslighting thing where they try to tell you what you're seeing with your own eyes isn't there. And, you know, it's like those people, just to bring it back to what we were saying, those people also, if they knew what was happening, they would step up. Like if they knew about, for instance, you know, 6-year-olds being put on hormones, you know, that whole thing, just these things that any sane, normal person would go, what the fuck is this? It's like, what do you, like, sort of, how do you view that process and its importance in terms of sort of the conversion of the normal person who maybe doesn't follow the intellectual dark web or the culture war, whatever you want to call it? What do we need to do there? How do we do it? What does that really mean to you, that process?
Well, first up, again, maybe it's just because when I studied political science, there's just a few things that I know to be true, right? Which is, and I'm sure the stats are very similar for the United States, despite lots of people having lots of loud opinions all of the time. The facts are that only a small handful of people do actually understand the Constitution at a postgraduate level. Right? Yeah. Very few people understand the difference between state, federal, local government. Yeah. Right? So often what you'll see is that people will vote for a local government to get back at the federal government. And I know I assume that applies in a federation. You guys are a federation too. We're a federation as well. And it's very similar. People, you know, your average person don't understand those things. They definitely don't understand like the legal system and how that works and legal process. They don't understand all of the intricacies of this stuff, right? But what they do understand is fair and unfair, right? Right, not right, you know, justice, you know, basic principles of, you know, even with feminism, like, and I truly, and again, maybe it's just because I'm in marketing and I truly, anti-jargon, first of all. One of my criticisms of the IDW is that they're not accessible to your average Joe, right? Yeah. Joe Rogan is an exception. Yes. And there's a reason why he's so popular, right? Is that he does represent that kind of, and that's why comedians have to be at the coalface of this, right? That's why culture is so important, because those people who are, I'm also just, I think by running a business and being in digital, I'm just allergic, and also being a working class kid, I'm just allergic to jargon. I see jargon and academics speak. You know, nothing against them. I just find them as another way to exclude people from what's really going on. It's another exercise of power. So I've always been, and again, just being in digital, you have to speak in plain language, right? Yes. It's just like to make it accessible to people. That's real accessibility and inclusion. Involves people being able. Was it Einstein that said if you can't explain something at a 6th grade level, you don't understand it? And it's the same. You know, I firmly believe in that side of things. So that's the first part, which is that people don't know what they don't know. That we need to make it accessible and clear and funny and speak in the words that people understand. And I use like swearing effectively for that reason, because most people speak like me. Most Australians speak like, we go, fuck off. Most of us just go, fuck off, like in our everyday language, right?
Same here.
Yeah. So I speak, it doesn't mean I can't argue or have a discussion with you know, academics, but they're not my people. I just go, oh, I'm friends with a lot of them, and it's like, stop being a wanker. You don't talk like that while we're drinking. Go away. It's like watching
That's one of the things I
and
love about Joe Rogan is he kind of bridges the gap there. You know what I mean? Like he can have someone on like Jordan Peterson and then sort of make it like he's the stand-in for the audience for a normal human being. Like Joe Rogan's a smart guy. I'm not saying he's unintelligent.
Yeah.
He's just
not
going to talk the way that
he
Jordan
understands.
Peterson talks. Yeah. And so he wants to break
but he
it
understands
down
what I understand. Yeah, which is that I love how I'm sitting here talking about language and I'm stuttering. I have a stutter, but my brain's moving faster than my mouth right now. So, I wasn't going to say, So there's the language part, but it's also, again, the whole cult thing. There's a great book by Stephen Hassan called Combating Cult Mind Control. And if we agree that it is a cult, which it is, right? I think it's pretty much almost even, I think James Lindsay and I had a little bit of a stoush 6 months ago or so where he was like, no, it's a sect, it's a religion. It's like, no, we're not debating anymore. I think we're just now, and I was like, it's a cult. He's like, no, it's not. I was like, it's a cult. Now he's going, it's a cult, it's a cult. So thanks, Taya. No, he's kidding. But we consensus is that it's a cult. That changes things because cults have victims, and everybody who is in a cult is a victim of the cult, and they need to be. It's a different thing. It's not a political. You see what I'm saying? It's not a political thing anymore. It's not. You can't be won over with ideas and hearts and minds. It has to be won differently, and that is with patience and love, and gentle, and you've got to stick by them even when they're swearing and spitting in your face. There's a whole thing, right? I've used The Exorcist as an example with the Linda Blair thing where they're possessed. It's a possession, right? So it's not a political, you can't beat with logic anymore. It's now an exorcism. That means loving and try and patience, and it can take people like years. I mean, sometimes someone can decide to leave the Church of Scientology. I don't know if you saw Miscavage's dad talk about, but he decided to leave Scientology 3 years before he left. Like, that's how long it can take to get out of something like this, right? And it has to be very careful, and it's a dangerous thing because it's actually so it's like you can't have it both ways. We can't use the word cult as a pejorative and not treat it like a cult, which has victims, which need love and compassion and kindness and a soft place to land when they leave. And that sort of gentle poking of their dissonance, but without sort of making, because one thing about cult members is that if you push them too hard, they go further into the cult. They often go further in. And that's the thing. So and this comes back to why I talk about normies, which is, like with MLM or Amway or, all those other weird cults that like form bad religions, you have to just tell people, don't walk into that Scientology center. It's not just a personality test. So by saying anti-racism is not what you think it is, it's that same inoculation, right? So that's what I think. That's why I believe you can't, once some people are in a cult, you can't necessarily, it's a hard game to get them out, but you can stop them joining.
Well,
it's a lot easier to stop someone joining.
And it kind of gets back to the whole idea to a certain extent of like the red pill, the namesake of this show, is that, Morpheus in the Matrix actually has a lot of regulations around who can be red pilled and how. It's sort of like, it's not something you just go up to someone and you say, by the way, what you're doing is a part of this whole big cult and you need to get out of it. You need to, read up on Jordan Peterson. You can't just like drop a bomb. I talked about this on my last podcast. My girlfriend, who I've been dating for 2 years, has made a ton of progress where we started dating and I knew she was a perfectly reasonable person and she happened to be pretty far on the left, and which just like I was maybe a year before meeting her. And I just sort of like, I developed a relationship with her. I would every once in a while, I'd be like, oh, have you heard of this guy? Have you heard of this guy? Maybe you want to, watch Dave Rubin with me for 30 minutes, or whatever. And she was open to it because it was a months long process. And then, at this point, she's, certainly very supportive of this show. And, I won't say her name. I don't want to dox her or anything, but she's, she's wonderful. And the process with her and also with another friend of mine recently, where I've noticed that there's a slow, and also my own process, by the way. I was a personal victim of the woke cult to a certain extent, just because I was so deep in college Democrats in 2016. And then my exit, like you said, mine took several years. It took about 2 years for me to really fully go from, I remember my first moment in 2017 of just going, seems like something's going on with I just kind of started to get a little bit of curiosity. And then it was like 2019, early 2019, late 2018. I was like, yeah, I need to like stay as far away from this thing as possible. And I actually probably need to fight it pretty hard. But
and also it hurts though. It hurt. Yes. And I think people don't really address, I think that's why a lot of the people who, I think I was talking about that destroy, that thing where debate and destroy and, why don't you go on right-wing podcasts to be destroyed or humiliated? And it's like, I think that there's a whole mindset there which doesn't take into account the fact that people who are leaving a cult, right, are hurting, they're vulnerable, and they can often jump out of the fry pan into the fire, into another cult. Like they're at it's not unusual for, say, a Mormon to leave and join this cult. Like that's why they love Mormons, right? Mormons love this shit because they think they're free from the Mormons, but then they move into another one because that makes them feel safe. Or, people who tend to cult jump or MLM jump, or because it gives them that same psychological, because it's extremely terrifying and makes people vulnerable. So that's one thing that I say to a lot of people who leave like the left, is I say that the answer to the idiots on the left is not the idiots on the right. The answer is to not be an idiot.
That's something that I have seen that with a couple of figures kind of in the intellectual dark web and online, is that I worry about, where I sort of see them just sort of giving giving up one set of dogma for another. And of course, at the end of the day, that, you don't want dogma, you just want that open-mindedness. And what you said about the pain that is experienced by people leaving a cult, I definitely relate to that personally. I know my girlfriend,
I've cried a lot.
A good friend of mine. Yes. Anyone who has gone through the process of having basically their worldview leveled to the ground. I mean, just blown up, with frickin' dynamite. You're just watching everything you believed kind of get picked apart. I still remember when I first, I watched some videos with like Larry Elder and Christina Hoff Sommers. And what they did is they took the race victim narrative and the gender victim narrative, which I believed wholeheartedly in 2016. I would go on Facebook and I'd be like, people voting for Donald Trump are racist, sexist, blah, blah, blah. And I saw, and in 2017, I saw them just picking this thing apart, and I just was melting. I was just going like, I didn't know any of that. Like we saw it. It happened to Dave Rubin.
That's called an identity. That's that identity quake. That's what that's called. Are you familiar with that term?
I haven't heard the term.
It's called an identity quake. Yeah. It's like an earthquake on your identity, your sense of self, and it's shattering. And that's why I think if there are any right wingers out there, be kind. And that's why when I say I prefer to focus on conduct rather than belief, because I think there's a lot of people, like I'm friends with Graham Linehan, right, who had to do an apology tour because he was part of cancelling Dankula and a few other people, right? But then he got cancelled, and the gracious way in which Dankula handled that was admirable, which was like, well, I understand. Like you didn't know, right? Yeah. Versus gloating and saying, ha, 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 ha. And that's part of the reason why I don't, there's just that whole thing on the gloating thing on the right, where if you don't sort of fully join the right and put on the MAGA hat and suddenly start going, I'm voting for Trump and like flag, flag, flag. It's like, well, no, that's not what we're like, I'm not abandoning my principles. Like I'm not.
And at the end of the day, that's what separates the open-minded people from the cults, is not sort of demanding, basically appreciating when people say like, hey, I was wrong about some stuff. I'm coming around. I may not agree with you 100%, not demanding that complete and total ideological purity and that complete and total like bootlicking, kneeling, action idea. That's what separates people in the resistance to the cult from the cult. Is just a certain amount of kindness and compassion. And that's something I always say is, if you look at someone like, in my opinion, Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein, you see character. Like that's something I always say,
I love Brett.
To notice. You'll start to notice when you look at the people
and Heather,
who are resisting this.
Can we just make a shout out? Can we shout out to the women behind the men who never get the credit? Thank you.
No, really. I actually always say that's something I love to do with my girlfriend.
I'm winding you up. It's okay.
No. We were watching Dark Horse last night. That's actually funny because my girlfriend and I were watching Dark Horse last night, and I was saying, isn't Heather Hying the best. Aren't they such a cool couple?
Oh,
Because they're just they're
my husband is in love with her.
No, they're a dynamic duo. They're fantastic. And my
Yeah.
girlfriend likes Deborah So too. There's a little
Yeah.
women of IBW
I get frustrated.
caucus in it.
But I get frustrated with watching Rogan because when he was talking to James, I love James, but they go, oh, and who's that other woman that's part of the thing? Who's that other woman? Oh, you mean Helen Pluckrose? And I go, I know they're just, they're being funny, but it's just, no,
that's funny.
Anyway, sorry, that was a side point.
No, it's just fun. It's just funny because I was just watching last night.
All of the women who aren't.
All people I'd like to have
here's
on
an
my
interesting
show,
yeah I'm hoping to talk to Heather soon, actually, so
nice.
I'm prioritizing the women first, and talking to them, because one thing that men don't realize is this absence of women from Wikipedia who were, like, if you look at something like, say, Karl Marx's Wikipedia page versus his daughter, or you look at Nietzsche, right, versus Elizabeth Nietzsche, who, like, here's your history. So, okay, this goes back to what we're talking about with cults and defending critical theory. I use the controlled burn when the fire jumps the road and burns down the town. I believe that there's still role for the controlled burn of critical theory in sociology, so long as it doesn't jump the road and burn down the town. I like to use that metaphor, right? It's not something that should be ever applied. Like Marxism, it can't be applied. It's a theoretical framework for analysis, right? But Elizabeth Nietzsche was actually, so Nietzsche died. She took his work. And they blamed Nietzsche for the Holocaust. And it's like, that was a woman who did that. She was a Nazi. And she was the one who used her brother's philosophy, and got it in front of Hitler, right? Huh. And I sit there and I go, wow, hey, this woman played a role in history that, that's not a good role to play. But Nietzsche got the blame. See, the other side to that is the fact that the men, when they get the credit, they also get the blame, right, as well. But at the same, I just find that an interesting story from history of women who are forgotten but also evil.
Yeah, men seem to get Nietzsche, the attention, good or bad, I guess, historically. It's a blessing and a curse for us.
But blaming critical theory for with the totalitarian movement that we're seeing right now is basically like blaming Nietzsche for the Holocaust. It's not that leap is. It doesn't invalidate the idea or contribution of Nietzsche or Marx for that matter, right? They're the same sorts of things, right? Especially, and Marx would hate these, because Marx and Pomo, they've clashed since the beginning of time. One book that I really would love to write is the great socialist splits and fights of all time. They're epic, and they're often over the stupidest of things. Like Marx split with the socialists over whether you should be revolutionary or reformist, right? And he went, you guys are all too fucking crazy, I'm out. That was Marx. Marx fought with the socialists because they took his ideas. Like, that's pretty funny.
It seems like there's always infighting, and part of me is kind of hoping that the sort of like what I see with the like really, really radical feminist stuff and some of the trans stuff started to butt heads. I'm like, do it. I'm like, divide and conquer. But anyway, there's something specific. Speaking of the trans stuff, there's something specifically I wanted to ask you about on a specific issue, because it was something I saw you mention on Twitter that I'm not super familiar with, and I was wondering if you could enlighten me a little bit. This term self-ID, and it seems like this is coming up in your native Australia, is something where it seems like one of the things I find interesting about the fight over sort of transsexual or transgender issues is that it doesn't always come up in like hard legislation. And I think that makes it hard to debate, because people will say, oh, it's just about rights. It's about human dignity. And it's like, okay, well, of course we support people's rights and human dignity. But then
that's
the actual
not what it's
issues
about.
come up, like, competing in women's sports or self-ID. Could you just say, like, what is self-ID exactly? What's going on in Australia with it? And what's sort of your position on it?
So with self-ID, basically the idea is that you don't need surgery. So the thing that, okay, let me go through and let me tell you what happened with me, okay? It was a matter of discovery. So it's very much linked to Jezebel and what I saw happening with Jezebel. I used to read that website just, to keep across, as one of many sources of news. And every so often I'd like, avoid work in the comments and that sort of stuff. And I saw the conversation shift where intersectionality, and it was always like The trans woman had the final word on every single thing, and they were in charge now. And it was just at the center of the universe, and it was always the center, always the center. And every single, it was something I saw in like over the course of about a year and a half, where it became just completely, you couldn't even say anything or speak anything without that. And I went, that's interesting. Again, I'm on board. I'm all cool. What happened was then I saw some rab femme jump on the comments and went, fuck you, you man. You're not a man. And I went, whoa, okay, that's harsh. But what she did was she linked to Feminist Current, which was Megan Murphy's website.
Yes.
And I saw a because and that was the first time I saw the word TERF. And so there was no real cancellation with me. It was more just winning the argument, like just reading and going, oh, okay. Because I saw that feminism had gone off the rails. Like I'm sitting there going, like, since when did Jezebel review lipsticks and become about the Kardashians? Like, I have a love-hate relationship with the Kardashians, but I mean, what? Huh? Well, you know, I was sitting there going, okay, am I old? Like, did feminism change? Like, what the fuck is going on? Right? You know, like I just, I was very confused. And again, you just write it off. You go, internet people, comment section. Being dumb. Comment section is dumb. Like it's like that's you know, rule. That's just that. Yeah, it is. But I never read the comments, and you just start to go, okay, that was just, and you just I wrote it off that way. But I just happened to catch that where someone linked to Feminist Current about the word TERF, and then I started to read a bit more about what had been happening to Megan Murphy, what had been happening with Bill C-16. Particularly around self-ID, and Vancouver Rape Shelter was the thing that actually made me go, what the actual fuck is going on? Like I had no idea, because I thought that, you know, I honestly just thought I was an ally. I didn't even think about it. That's part of the reason why educating normies and going, hey, this is something you need to be aware of, because I think a lot of people are just letting this stuff pass without it being thought about, right? And my policy legal brain, and I go, how the fuck did this pass? Like, as part of the policy cycle and process, you've got to consider unintended consequences as like part 2 of the whole process. Like, why is this such a, I just sit there and I just went, what the fuck is happening? Like,
because basically.
So anyway, so self-ID means that you don't need surgery. You don't need anything other than maybe two psych appointments. Like, if that, you could just fill out, in Australia, it's called a statutory declaration. Which is basically like a legal declaration that's notaried, like signed by a notary. So you fill out a form, basically, and you're a woman, legally. And no one saw a problem with that, like law at all. And suddenly you're a bigot for pointing that out. And suddenly I just went, whoa. And then I had an interaction like with my child that confused me as well, where I said, I started to talk about what was happening in Canada, and I went, look at this crazy shit. And she went, oh, you're evil, and looked at me like I was evil. And I'm like, huh? What? I thought you were a feminist. And that was and this was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it's just, since then, that whole sort of critical thinking thing sort of really, I just honestly thought that a lot of this stuff was the comment section. I think a lot of, I didn't realize that it was law. I didn't realize that the comment section was becoming law. There you go. There's your fucking headline for this one. The comment section has become law.
It's the inmates taking over the asylum. I mean, it's letting the craziest people on earth make our laws. And
over the last few years, I sat there going, like, surely the adults are going to take over soon. The adults are going to take over soon. Surely someone's going to step in. Like, I sat there and I was like, oh, it'll never pass here. It'll never pass here. Like, it's preposterous, right? And then it passed in Victoria, which is a state in Australia here. Mm-hmm. We had it I'm in Western Australia. We had it, but it actually didn't pass consultation, which is the correct process was followed. But it's only a matter of time before these things, are pushed again. I hope it doesn't, but they keep trying. But again, a lot of the tactics, again, I just went, when you observe the behavior, which is, when you look at things like entryism and you look at what entryist movements do, how totalitarianism behaves. Because again, I think it's just having that theoretical understanding. I went, holy shit, this is like a totalitarian movement, not just the trans thing, but the whole sort of woke movement.
Yeah.
And I would argue that it's not a left. you know what? Increasingly, I shouldn't say this, but, I've said it on my own streams, but I'm hypothesizing, and I'm still working through this stuff. But when you understand radicalization and front groups and the idea that like a lot of things like ISIS and, and those sorts of groups, right, when they radicalize, they often create front groups that conceal what the actual organization is trying to do. And sometimes they're the opposite of what that group is. And I sit there and I go, if I could design the perfect movement to implode the left for decades, right? If I could design the perfect thing, if I was an evil right-wing, like crazy, I'm going to implode the left, hit them out of the park. Yeah, I'm going to hit the entire political left out of the park so that they cannot recover for decades. I would design this movement. And I sit there and I go, well, is it out there that this may actually be, it's not a coincidence that white fragility and these sort of books are mirroring white supremacists and mirroring sort of these things, that it actually may be front groups for the alt-right. And it's just I don't know. This is how my brain works. And I go, look, knowing what I know to be true, I always filter things through what I know to be true. Right? And you sit there and you go, I wonder, because it's not the left that you or I or anyone on the left recognize.
Well, and how quickly it crops up, you can't help but wonder how the hell it actually came to be. I feel
it has to be money. Has to be money behind it. You can't do a movement. Anyone who works in politics, you know this, you've worked in politics as well. And it needs, like, to get something this big, this quickly, it needs some serious money. And there's a lot of people that benefit from it. Especially
there's an industry. I call it Outrage Inc. I call it Outrage Incorporated. There's a whole
Matt Taibbi has a book, Hate Incorporated. That's what he calls it. Matt Taibbi. Right? And it's the same thing. It's a whole cycle. Advertising, Google revenue. It's just a whole new complex, basically, a whole new advertising political complex, a way to keep youth consuming, right? Eyeballs on screens, outraged perpetually. Honestly, like, Soylent Green is social with this shit. It really is. Like, it's just like they're sitting there and they're like, they're constantly consuming, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure buy stocks in coloured hair dye.
Yeah. No, it's and it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. No, it's an addiction. It's a lifestyle, and it makes a lot of people a lot of money. But I want to
and fast fashion.
Yeah. Well, in the time we have left, Taya, there's something I ask everyone who comes on the show, and it's sort of my classic question, and that's just, what is your prescription in terms of what you think? We've talked about this a little bit, but what do you think is the thing that people should be doing, whether they're a normal, a normie, if you will, sort of like normal, everyday private person, someone like us who kind of has a medium-sized audience, is talking about the stuff online, or the big people like we talked about, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson. What do you think people need to do to fight back against woke? I call it woke supremacy. You call it the woke cult. I just feel like I make that a theme of the show because I think we need concrete sort of battle plans. I hate to use that kind of language, but I do think that it's kind of necessary. As you said, it's a cult. We got to treat it that way. What are some things you think people should be doing specifically?
First of all, I think that because this is inherently a narcissistic movement that sort of fuels narcissistic desires, we should laugh at it as much as possible. I'm serious, because the ideas are inherently ridiculous, right? And I think that that's one thing, and that's the Achilles heel of the movement. Keep laughing, okay? Do Monty Python. Sit there kicking the sand till you laugh to the grave if you have to, right? Second of all, don't underestimate the danger and seriousness of the movement in the sense that when we're faced with totalitarian movements that are funded like this, don't be a dick about it, and don't think that you're no, I'm saying, like, don't think that this is just don't think that this is a fun thing. Like, I know that it looks like it's just Twitter fun or whatever, but this is actually an extremely insidious and dangerous movement, right? And also, again, apply Scientology and fair game and what they do to a suppressive person and all of that. Once you apply that thinking, you understand what you're dealing with, that you can have your life destroyed by fucking with them in the wrong way. What it requires is loving and understanding and just facts, thinking. And also tune into channels like this and just every day, just, remind yourself that it's not you. You're just being gaslit. This is a mass gaslighting thing. And learn as much as you can about what totalitarian movements are. Arm yourself with facts. Like the fact that I'm struggling with this week is the thing that I didn't know, that the Trump disabled reporter thing wasn't true. Like that, I went, that was something I took as truth. And I was watching Tim Pool with Brandon, and I went and looked and I went, holy shit, I didn't know. I just took that as truth. So I'm having a little crisis again. There's a lot. And also just understand that this is going to hurt, and that you need people around you that understand, and that it's okay to just reach out to people, because people reach out to me, and I'm sure they do to you as well. For those who are outside of it, right? Don't fight it like a dickhead. Fight it smart, because you just don't lose your Twitter account. Okay, I'm saying because it's important. You keep it.
Yeah,
and
having
if you tweet,
a sense of self-preservation.
Yeah.
Don't be like you listening to this.
Yeah.
We need you. We can't lose you.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be an idiot. I mean, I tell jokes, but you may notice like that I never target an individual. I make jokes. I have plausible deniability built into everything that I do.
You're tactful.
I'm strategic about it. And when I say don't underestimate this thing, that's what I mean. Which is it's be smart about it.
Yeah. One wrong step and you're unpersoned. You're wiped off the face of the internet, and then there's only.
And if you run digital, exactly. And if you run digital communities that are imploding, then that's something that I do as a consulting thing. I'm happy to do it, because I've run fan communities for most of my career, and I'm seeing that implode in a few different places where they don't know what's going on. Because a lot of people, they're just normies who run a Facebook community, and all of a sudden everyone's bickering over this stuff. So I'm always happy to give you some strategies and stuff around that if people need that. But sorry, that's not a sales pitch. It's just a general thing.
No,
but
thank you. Taya, everything you just said is one of my favorite things I've heard. I've only done 3 episodes of the show, but I did a podcast before that had 20 episodes. That's a great answer to. Those are such important points, such great points. I think I might make it into a clip. That's a really great answer. Just things that seriously, things that we can do to fight this thing. Taya, I want to thank you for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug before we go?
Not really. You can just check out I stream every day. I don't edit, so don't ask me to. I edit, I stream every day, and I do have a podcast called The Verboten that I do sort of ad hoc. I'm trying to get guests. I run my own race and do that stuff, but yeah, I mostly just consult and do my digital thing. And I don't know how I'm going. I quit marketing, so I'm figuring stuff out at the moment. But just watch me, like me, whatever. It's all good.
It sounds good. All right, everyone listening, check out Taya's stuff. All of her social media will be in the description down below. Taya, thank you for coming on Red Pill Nation. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review. If you're listening to us on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time on Red Pill Nation.